Hello, this is a recording of a story from an Inuit source. There's a whole variety of tribes of Inuits. This particular version comes from some of the Greenland tribes, or nations, I think is probably a better word than tribes, concerning a magical dog. I'm recording this because it's the year of the dog in Chinese zodiac. Which I suppose I ought to be recording a Chinese story, but for various reasons I've decided to record an Inuit one instead. The tale runs that long, long ago there was, living in a small community, just in an isolated house along with her father, a beautiful young woman called Niviarsiang. Niviarsiang was courageous, she was thoughtful, she was independent, she was imaginative. She was the sort of woman who could have won any husband that she wanted, but she never wanted any of them. Man after man after man came to pay court, and she would just turn them away. There was this, that and the other wrong with them. None of them ever quite won her heart, such that her father, Ijirqang, despaired of ever finding anyone to marry her off to, despaired of ever having grandchildren to look after him in his dotage, and heaven knows he was old enough at the time, and in dire need of someone to look after him. And then one day, a dog came to their house, to their hut, and scratched upon the door. A dog with red and white spots upon its fur. And this dog was a speaking dog, it was a magical dog. It won the heart of Niviarsiang. It charmed her, it wooed her. And if that sounds strange, well, these were dim and distant times, and people were strange back then. And eventually, having won the heart of Niviarsiang, the dog set about winning the heart of Ijirqang, her father, and convincing him that he, although a dog, would nonetheless be a great provider, a great benefit to them, that he had this huge, thick, warm pelt that would keep them all warm in the direst of winters. And indeed, when he snuggled up to both his beloved young lady and sat close to her father, they could feel the heat radiating off his body. They could imagine what it would be like to wrap their arms around him, to have his paws wrapped around them during the direst and coldest of the winters. He would be like a living thermal blanket. And the thought may be that their children would be likewise gifted with thick pelts about their body to keep them warm in winter. And everyone knew that dogs were great hunters, so therefore they felt reassured that this dog, Ijirqang, would be a great provider for the family. And the wedding was arranged. The woman married the dog, and life was good for them for the first few months. And then rapidly, young love being what it is, and honeymoons and so forth, the young woman, Niviarsiang, fell pregnant, and she grew heavier and heavier and heavier. And it was a strangely rapid pregnancy, far faster than women normally have, at least human women, that is. But perhaps because of the nature of what was in her womb not being entirely human, the pregnancy passed the quicker. And finally she gave birth, not to one child or two child or three children, but to 10 children, dectuplets, if you can imagine such a thing, stretch marks up to her ear-holes. But to 10 children she gave birth, and these were not 10 bright, bonny little human babies. The first 5 children that came out of her womb were dogs, this spitting image of their father, little husky dogs, little snow dogs, who came out no different from any other puppy that's been born upon the earth. And strange as it was to see puppies emerging from her womb, she loved them as a mother would. The next 5 children who came out of Niviarsiang's womb were a mixture, half like their mother and half like their father. The top half was like their mother, human in appearance, no different from any other human child, but the bottom half, from the waist down, the legs were like their father. They had dog's legs and tails and fur upon their dog's legs, with the shape and nature of the back legs of a dog. And so they were half human and half dog. Not exactly werewolves, but some strange fusion of one and the other. And these they named the Adlet. The Adlet and the 5 puppy children grew and grew and grew as rapidly as puppies and Adlets will. And just as puppies and Adlets will, they barked and they barked and they played and they fought with each other and they tumbled about, and they were voracious. They ate and they ate and they ate. If there was no meat to eat, they would chew slippers, they would chew the furniture, they would pull bits of material off the clothes, most of which were made of animal hide, and chew them. They were a bundle of energy and trouble and mayhem, the way you might imagine any group of puppies or half puppies would be. And whilst Ijirqang had said he would be a good hunter, being a dog, and his father-in-law and his wife had assumed he would be a good hunter, in fact, he hardly went out to hunt at all. He was a good father. He looked after his puppies and his half-puppies, his adlets, but he never went hunting. And it was left to the old father, to old Ijirqang, to do all of the hunting for them. And he was getting tired, he was getting old, it was exhausting for him to go out into the forests and hunt animals and bring them back, but he could hardly see his daughter starve or his grandchildren starve. He wasn't too fussed about letting his son-in-law starve, in all fairness, but not the others. And eventually he said to them, "Look, I'm old, and I'm tired, and I'm worn down, and I will keep hunting for you, but the noise of the children, of the puppies, barking and yipping and fighting and tumbling over each other, squabbling, I need my rest. If I'm to get up early and to go out hunting, I need to get a decent night's sleep. I can't be constantly woken up by these 10 squalling dog children." And his daughter could understand the wisdom of the point, and they discussed it and decided that they would sail out, the mother, the father and the 10 dog children, to go and live on a small island out in the bay, and the old grandfather would stay in his old house. He would do the hunting, and every day the father, Ijirqang, would doggy paddle over from the island to collect food, and then doggy paddle back again and bring the food to his wife and to his children. And for the first few days this worked perfectly well. He would swim over with 2 big shoes on a cord wrapped around his neck where his wife had put it, and the old grandfather, old Ijirqang, would pile in chunks of meat into the shoes, both of them, and the dog would paddle back across the water, and the food would be shared amongst his wife and amongst his many children and himself. But on the 3rd day of this, and whether he had been planning this all along, who can say, but on the 3rd day, old Ijirqang, when his son-in-law paddled over, tongue lolling, tail wagging, with the 2 big old shoes, his wife's shoes, around his neck, Ijirqang kept him talking and chatting and pointing at this and pointing at that whilst stuffing the shoes. And the reason he kept his son-in-law talking and chatting, which normally he did not do, for he was not a talkative old man, was to ensure that the dog was not paying attention to what was being stuffed in the shoes, for it was not meat, but big, heavy stones. The old man helped his son-in-law down to the shore, carrying the shoes laden down with rocks, and at the very last minute he put the shoes, as he usually did, around the dog's neck and said, "Off you go, off you, back to your wife and back to your children." And Ijirqang started paddling out and paddling out and paddling out, and found it harder and harder and harder to get across the waters, for the rocks were extremely heavy and they weighed him down and weighed him down, and eventually he grew tighter and tighter until the inevitable happened. And Ijirqang sank beneath the waves, dragged down by the many, rocks stuffed in the shoes by his murderous father-in-law. And Ijirqang was no more. He had sunk into the Western Oceans. Well, it was only a matter of hours before his now widow Niviarsiang, she realised what had happened, that her husband had gone across and had not come back, that something dreadful had happened to him. And she stood upon the rocks and she looked out and she looked out, and eventually she spotted his prone body floating in the waters some sizable distance away, and she realised that somehow her father, who had looked after her and her children so well all of these years, somehow he had engineered the death of her husband, left her 10 children fatherless. And she was furious. She wanted her revenge. More than that, she was afraid that if she just let the matter go, it would be a matter of time before the old man came to seek the death of her 10 children. And so she piled the 5 puppies and the 5 Adlet in the boat, and in the dead of night she sailed them across the waters, knowing that by then they would be asleep and silent. And at last they arrived on the mainland, and she took the sleeping bodies, and one by one she took them out of the boat and placed them on the land, and she sat with them until, yawning and stretching, they woke up with the dawn light. And the first thing they did was to start yipping about how hungry they were, and she sent them into the hut where the old grandfather lived. And at her instructions they set about him, avenging themselves for the death of their father. They chewed off his hands, the hands that had stuffed the rocks in the shoes, and they chewed off the old man's feet, in reminder of the shoes that he had stuffed with those murderous rocks. And they left him there to bleed through the stumps of his wrists and the stumps of his ankles. And for all I know and all I care, the old man bled to death there and then. But the mother of these 10 strange children, Niviarsiang, she had to make yet another dark decision. What could she do? What would she do with these strange children? For who knows whether her father had died and might rise again as an angry spirit to seek vengeance, or even if somehow he had survived the chewing off of his hands and feet, he might come slithering upon his belly like a serpent seeking vengeance. She couldn't take the risk to her children. And so the 5 Adlet, the half-dog, half-human children of her womb, she packed off inland and sent them mile upon mile upon mile. And eventually they settled down, and they found wives, and they found husbands, and they bred, and they bred, and they spread. And the Adlet are the ancestors of those nations of the Native Americans that live further south than Greenland. And the puppies she placed upon the boat, and she pushed that boat out upon the waters with instructions on how to paddle themselves with their little puppy paws across the oceans. And they went and they went and they went on a vast long journey. The waters carried them all the way to Europe, and they became the ancestors of the Europeans, who one day, many centuries later, made their way back to Greenland, back to the home of their great distant ancestors. And like any true loyal dog, they brought with them gifts for the Inuit. Gifts of technology, gifts of metal, gifts of fine cloth and things that the Inuit could never have for themselves. And so Niviarsiang's children on both sides, to Europe and into the Americas, came back eventually one day to benefit their mother's people. Thank you.